Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. You don't ever think about the end of the world while working deep underground. There's already enough to worry about. A cave-in, a gas leak, your oxygen line getting caught on something. But when everything above starts falling apart, and you're miles beneath it, you start to feel it in your bones. My name's Ray, and I've worked the Black Hollow coal mine for over 10 years. It's one of those mines nestled into the Appalachian spine, old enough to feel haunted, but modern enough to pass inspections. I worked the night shift, mostly because it paid better. There were 4 of us down there that night: me, Big Mike, Tony, and our greenhorn, Darren. At around 10:30 p.m., we were working the lower tunnels. Shaft 12B, one of the oldest parts of the mine. We were halfway through our shift when the radio crackled. It wasn't the usual chatter from dispatch. It was frantic. Dispatch to all teams. Return topside immediately. Emergency protocol. There was static after that, no explanation. Mike chuckled nervously. Bet someone left the coffee pot on fire again. But I wasn't laughing. Dispatch never used that tone unless something serious was happening. Fires, collapses, or worse. I keyed the mic. "This is Ray from 12B. We got the message. What's going on up there?" More static. Darren looked uneasy. "Should we leave the gear?" "No," I said. "Take what you can carry. If it's a false alarm, they'll have our heads for leaving it behind." We packed up quick. The path back to the surface was a winding mess of narrow tunnels and rusted rails. As we started our climb back up, I felt it. Something strange. The air had shifted. Heavier. Still. Like the mine itself was holding its breath. Halfway up, just before shaft 9A, we found the first sign something was wrong. The emergency lights were out. Backup generators always kept the red lights glowing, but now there was only our headlamps cutting through the dark. Tony frowned. That's not right. And it wasn't. When we got to the central lift, it was stuck. The gate was open, the car was gone, and the panel was dead. I radioed again. Nothing. Not even static this time. Just silence. "We're walking," I said, motioning toward the ladder shaft. It wasn't ideal. It added another 45 minutes to our climb, but it was the only option. That's when we heard the scream. It didn't echo like a normal voice in a tunnel. It was muffled, like it came through layers of dirt and stone. It made my spine stiffen. Darren turned pale. "That sounded wrong?" he whispered. Mike raised his pickaxe. "We're not alone down here." The strange thing was, we didn't see anything. Not yet, but we could hear something. Skittering, not footsteps, faster, lighter, like something crawling along the rock. The sound was bouncing around us, impossible to trace. Then the air got worse, like it had gone sour. The sulfuric smell that usually hung around the deep shafts was stronger now. I pulled my mask tight, but it didn't help much. We pushed on. By the time we reached shaft 5, Darren was shaking. "Why aren't we hearing from dispatch?" I didn't answer. I had a bad feeling. That kind of feeling that sits in your gut and grows heavier with every step. That's when Tony dropped his flashlight. It clattered across the ground and spun into the dark. He chased it, cursed, and then froze. "Tony?" I called out. He turned slowly. His face had gone slack. "There's someone down there." We followed his beam to the far end of the tunnel. At first, it just looked like a shadow. Then it moved, staggered. The figure was hunched, twitching like it didn't know how to walk. Its arms hung low, like they were too heavy, and its face, when it caught the light, was covered in dark smears. Its eyes were wide open but didn't blink. "Hey!" Mike shouted. The figure let out a noise I still can't explain. It wasn't a growl or a scream. It was like air being forced through broken pipes. And then it rushed us. Mike swung his pickaxe out of instinct, caught the thing in the shoulder, but it didn't stop, didn't cry out, just kept coming. It lunged at Tony. We all moved at once. I don't even remember pulling my emergency flare, but I lit it and shoved it between them. The light startled the figure enough to make it stumble back. That gave Mike a chance to grab Tony and drag him away. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the second access tunnel. I slammed the hatch shut behind us and locked it. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing hard, listening. But there were more of them now. We could hear them in the vents, in the walls, crawling, dragging their feet, and sometimes scratching at the rocks. Darren finally said it out loud. That wasn't normal. I nodded. Something's happening up there, and it's coming down here. We had two options: try the secondary lift, or head for the old rail line that ran to the south exit, unused since '97. One was quicker but louder. The other, a gamble through the forgotten parts of the mine. I didn't like either choice. But staying put, that wasn't an option either. We had to move. We chose the old rail line. It was a risk, sure. That tunnel hadn't been maintained in decades, and there were stories, old miner superstitions, about what lurked down there. But whatever those things were behind us, they weren't stories. They were real, and they were closing in fast. The four of us slipped through an old maintenance hatch and dropped into the abandoned shaft. It was tighter here. Older construction, timber braces creaking under pressure. The air was thick with dust, and the floor was a mix of damp gravel and loose coal. Each step felt like walking on broken glass. "Keep your lights low," I told the others. "We don't want to draw attention." Mike was in front, leading with his pickaxe. Darren was right behind him, still trembling. Tony stuck close to me, holding one of the flares like it was the only thing keeping him sane. About 10 minutes in, we found an old minecart turned on its side, rusted through. Looked like it had been abandoned during the cave-in of '97. That's when we noticed something strange. Deep scratches along the walls. Long, parallel gouges that ran for yards. Not from tools. These were uneven, claw-like. "No way," Tony muttered. "What could do that to solid rock?" No one answered. We didn't have an answer. The tunnel began to dip lower, and soon the walls were sweating. Water seeped from the ceiling, dripping into stagnant puddles. The sound echoed like footsteps. At one point, we all stopped because we thought we heard a voice. It sounded like someone whispering. We turned off our lights and stood in the dark. I held my breath. For a moment, it was silent. Then, very faintly, we heard it again. Not words, more like humming. Tuneless, just a low, wet murmur coming from somewhere up ahead. "I don't like this," Darren said. "Quiet," Mike snapped, his voice barely above a whisper. We crept forward. Every step brought us closer to that sound. It grew louder, more strained, like someone forcing their voice through cracked lungs. And then we saw them. 3 figures, crouched low near the end of the tunnel, all facing away from us. Their backs were arched, their limbs jerking now and then. They looked like miners at first, covered in coal dust, wearing torn gear. But their helmets had been smashed in, and their skin was blotchy, pale, stretched too tight. One of them twitched violently and slammed their head into the wall. Once, twice, over and over. That humming? It was coming from them. Darren whimpered. One of the figures snapped its head toward us. Its mouth was open wider than it should have been. The jaw hung loose, and its eyes glowed faintly in our lights, like cave spiders. "Back. Now," I whispered. Too late. They moved like lightning. One of them scrambled across the walls like it weighed nothing. The others came straight at us, arms out, claws scraping the rails. Mike shouted and swung wide, catching one square in the chest. The thing didn't even flinch. Tony threw his flare. It burst against the floor, bathing the tunnel in red light. The figures recoiled, shielding their faces. One screeched, retreating into the dark. We ran. The tunnel twisted like a coiled snake. Sometimes it opened wide. Other times we had to crouch and squeeze through. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. Somewhere along the way, Darren tripped and went down hard. I turned, ready to help, but one of the creatures had caught up. It grabbed Darren by the leg, dragging him back towards the shadows. "No!" he screamed, clawing at the ground. I lunged and caught his arm. "Help me!" I yelled. Mike and Tony doubled back. Together, we yanked Darren free. The thing hissed and lunged again, but Mike slammed his light into its face, blinding it long enough for us to get away. We ducked into a side tunnel, barricading the entrance with fallen boards and a rusted cart. Then silence. Only the sound of our breathing. Darren was crying quietly. His pants were torn and something had scratched his ankle, but it wasn't deep. "You're okay?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're okay." We stayed there for a while, listening. The humming returned, farther away now. They were still out there, but they hadn't found us yet. Mike slumped against the wall. "What are they?" "I don't know," I said. "But they were people once. Miners, maybe. Something changed them." "Changed them how?" I hesitated. "Remember the emergency call?" Tony nodded. Dispatch said emergency protocol. That's more than a fire. There's something happening up top, something big, and whatever it is, it's spreading. No one said anything after that. We'd been underground for hours, but there was no way to tell how long exactly. My watch had stopped ticking. So had Tony's. There was only one goal now: reach the south exit. We were close, if the tunnel hadn't collapsed. We gathered ourselves and moved forward again. The tunnel began to rise. We were heading back toward the surface, at least partially. That gave us hope. But hope is fragile down here. Because that's when we heard the sound no miner ever wants to hear. The rumble of shifting earth. The tunnel groaned. Timbers snapped, and the ceiling started to fall. The ceiling came down fast. I only had time to yell, "Down!" before the tunnel erupted in a storm of falling rock, dust, and ancient timber. Everything shook. The lights flickered. My ears rang as if someone had fired a cannon right next to me. Then, darkness. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was on my side, half buried in rubble. My helmet was gone, and the air was thick with dust. I coughed, pushing debris off my chest, calling out, "Mike, Tony, Darren." For a second, there was nothing. Then a cough, a weak moan. "Here!" Tony's voice came through the dust. "I'm here!" I crawled toward it, rocks shifting beneath me. My shoulder ached and something warm trickled down the side of my face. I didn't care. I found Tony pinned under a support beam. His leg was caught, but he was conscious. I looked around frantically. "Where's Mike? Where's Darren?" Tony groaned and pointed. A few feet away, I spotted a hand sticking out of the rubble. I rushed over and began digging, throwing aside broken boards and loose rock until I uncovered Mike. His eyes fluttered open. "Still here," he rasped. Relief hit me like a wave. But Darren, he wasn't answering. We spent 10 minutes searching, calling. digging through the collapsed passage. Finally, we found him. But not how we'd hoped, as he was curled up in a space barely big enough to fit him. His eyes were open, staring through us. The dust on his face made him look like a statue. I checked his pulse anyway. Nothing. We didn't say a word. We couldn't. There wasn't time to mourn, not properly. The collapse had blocked the tunnel behind us. The only way out now was forward, and we had no clue what lay ahead. I helped Tony up, and Mike supported him from the other side. His leg was bad, but not broken. Maybe torn muscle. He could walk if we moved slow. "Let's go," I said. Carefully. The tunnel narrowed into a tight crawl space. Our lights were growing weak. The batteries drained from the impact. I cracked another flare. Red light spilled out, flickering across the jagged walls. There was something about the red light that unsettled me. It made the walls look alive, like they were breathing. Pulsing. I shook it off, just nerves. We crawled for what felt like forever. Then, as we rounded a bend, we saw light. Faint. Pale blue. We froze. Natural light doesn't look like that underground. We approached slowly. The tunnel opened into a massive cavern, one I didn't even know existed. It was wide enough to hold a train, with old rail tracks winding through the center. Crystals jutted from the walls, glowing faintly with a bluish hue. A deep shaft dropped off in the center, disappearing into shadow. And huddled near the edge, figures. At least a dozen. They were swaying, some kneeling, others sitting still, silent, watching nothing. They looked like people at first, but their skin was stretched too tight. Their bones were all wrong. Some had extra joints, some had none. One of them had no face, just skin grown over where its features should have been. Yet it knew we were there. Its head turned toward us, slowly. Then another followed, and another. Mike raised his pickaxe. I pulled Tony back. The creatures didn't move right away. Instead, they started to whisper, a sound like dry leaves blowing across a cracked road. It wasn't a language. It was just noise, disjointed, wrong, but deliberate, like they were thinking out loud. Then they began to move, not run, not pounce, just walking, slowly, steadily, toward us. Tony panicked. "We need to go, now!" "Back to the tunnel," I yelled. But before we could retreat, one of them shrieked, a high, rattling sound that made my spine lock up, and the whole group charged. Mike swung his axe, hitting one in the neck. It crumpled, but didn't fall. Tony limped forward, flailing his flare, and by luck or instinct, the creatures backed off. "They don't like the light," he yelled. I pulled another flare from my belt and struck it. Bright orange. The creatures shrieked and hissed, recoiling into the shadows like rats exposed to fire. Some climbed the walls, others disappeared into the shaft. All of them retreated. We didn't stop to question it. We ran along the tracks, through the cavern, past old mining gear rusted beyond recognition. My heart felt like it was trying to punch through my ribs. Behind us, I could hear them following again, but slower this time. Stalking, waiting. The tunnel ahead split in two. Left path sloped down. Right path angled up. Instinct said go up. We followed the incline. Eventually, the rail ended, and the tunnel opened into another chamber. But this one was man-made, reinforced. I recognized the structure. The South Ventilation Station. It was sealed years ago after a gas leak, but there were stories that an emergency hatch still worked. We limped inside, slammed the heavy gate behind us, and braced it with steel piping. For now, we were safe. Tony collapsed against the wall. Mike sank to the floor, breathing hard. I looked around. The station was old but intact. dust-covered equipment, sealed lockers, and a rusted staircase that led upward, maybe toward the surface, maybe not. I wasn't sure what haunted me more, the things chasing us, or the idea that they used to be miners just like us. Something had changed them, something underground, and whatever it was still spreading. The ventilation station smelled like rust, oil, and stale air. I'd never been there before, but I'd heard stories, how it used to cycle fresh air into the lower tunnels before the whole system was shut down after a fire nearly cooked a team alive. Now it was just a tomb of metal and dust. Tony sat against the wall, his leg stretched out, face pale. Mike stood watch near the sealed door, pickaxe in hand, listening for any sound on the other side. I climbed the staircase to check the upper level. The air grew colder with each step. At the top, I found what I was hoping for, a thick metal hatch, half buried behind crates and rusted control panels. It was the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I wiped off the dust and checked the handle. It was stuck. Of course it was. "Mike!" I called down. "Get up here." He came up fast, leaving Tony below to rest. Together we worked the hatch handle. It groaned and screeched, resisting every turn. I could feel the metal bend as we forced it. Then, click. It gave. We pushed it open, light spilling down. But not sunlight. Just gray flat daylight from a cloud-covered sky. Still, after hours underground it looked like heaven. A rusted ladder led up through the open hatch. I climbed first, slowly, head poking above the surface. We were outside. A flat stretch of land covered in brush and gravel surrounded the hatch. To the left, a small shed stood abandoned. Beyond that, forest. Trees swayed in the wind. No roads, no signs of movement, just silence. I climbed all the way up and waved Mike to follow. "Come on," I said, "let's get Tony." We went back for him. He was barely able to stand, but he managed with help. We got him to the ladder, and I went up first, then helped pull him through. Mike climbed last, closing the hatch behind us and sliding a rusted pipe through the latch. The cold air hit us like a slap to the face. It felt sharp, clean, real. We were out, alive, but we weren't free. From the ridge, I could see the mine entrance far below. A dark hole in the hillside, and just outside it, movement. Figures stumbling out of the dark, blinking at the light like they hadn't seen it in years. Dozens of them, maybe more, covered in dust, their skin pale, stretched. Some moved with jerky steps, others crawled. They didn't see us yet. Mike cursed under his breath. "It's spreading. They're not staying down there." I couldn't look away. They were walking in different directions. Some toward the woods, some toward the road in the distance. A few just stood there, as if waiting for something. Tony groaned and nearly collapsed. I snapped out of it. "We need to move. There's an emergency radio in the watchtower up the trail. If it still works, we can call for help." We moved slow, keeping low, making our way toward the tree line. That's when we heard it. A distant engine. A rumble that grew louder. We ducked behind a thicket just as a vehicle came into view. An old mining company truck. It pulled up near the mine entrance and stopped. Two men climbed out. One wore a company jacket. The other held a tablet. They weren't here to help. They didn't look shocked at the scene. In fact, they looked expectant. They scanned the area, speaking calmly to each other. Then the man with the tablet tapped the screen. "Test site active. Phase 2 beginning now." My stomach dropped. Mike looked at me. "What did he say?" I didn't answer. Instead, I watched in horror as one of the men opened the back of the truck and pulled out something long and silver, like a canister. He rolled it toward the mine entrance. Then he activated it. A soft hiss. A thick fog began pouring out. The creatures reacted instantly. They stopped wandering, turned, began walking, together into the woods, like sleepwalkers obeying a signal. "What the?" Mike whispered. Tony moaned. "They're controlling them." He was right. This wasn't just an outbreak. This was a test. Whatever those men released, it didn't hurt the creatures. It organized them. That fog wasn't for stopping the spread. It was for directing it. Mike tensed. "We need to get out of here, now." We crawled back through the trees, keeping out of sight. My brain was spinning. If this was some kind of experiment, who was running it? Why underground? Why miners? Then something else occurred to me. What if this wasn't the first test? What if we were just one site out of many? We made it to the watchtower just as the sky began to darken. Clouds churned overhead. Wind picked up. There was static in the air like a storm was coming. The tower was old, the stairs groaning under our weight. At the top, we found the radio room, mostly intact. Dust-covered and full of cobwebs, but still powered. I flicked the switch. Static buzzed. I adjusted the dial. "This is an emergency broadcast. Repeat, emergency. We are 3 survivors of the Hartlow mine collapse. Unknown infection. Hostile individuals underground. Creatures moving northward. Do you read?" Nothing. Then, click. A voice came through, faint, female. "Survivors, infection confirmed, remain in place, team inbound." The signal cut. Mike looked at me. "Did they say team inbound?" "Yeah." Tony slumped against the wall. "They better hurry." I stepped to the window, staring out at the tree line. The creatures were gone, but the mist still hung in the air like a warning. Something was wrong with the world now. And whatever had started down in the mine, it wasn't finished. The tower creaked with every gust of wind. Rusted bolts rattled in their sockets. It felt like the entire structure could peel away and blow off the ridge at any second. We waited. No more radio signals came through. Tony dozed off near the radio console, cradling his injured leg. Mike sat beside the window with a broken pair of binoculars, scanning the woods. I paced, nerves fried. "How long do you think it'll take?" Mike asked. "This rescue team?" "No idea," I said, "if they're coming." "You think they're not?" I looked at him. I think they heard us, but I also think someone else was listening. Mike didn't argue. He just went back to scanning the tree line. We'd watched those creatures, those people, walk into the forest in silence, as if guided by something invisible. The canister fog, or whatever it was, had changed them, tamed them, directed them. And if those 2 men had the tools to do that, what else did they have? We weren't just survivors, we were witnesses. That made us a problem. Suddenly, a crack echoed from the trees, like a branch snapping underfoot. Mike tensed. "You hear that?" I nodded. Another snap, closer. Then, the sound of slow, uneven footsteps on gravel. Tony stirred. "Is it them?" I checked the window. 2 figures emerged from the forest. Not creatures, men, but not the ones from the truck either. These 2 wore tactical gear, dark uniforms, helmets with face shields. One carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. The other held a handheld device that beeped softly. They didn't look like rescuers. I backed away from the window. "Get down, now!" We crouched behind the desk just as the radio crackled back to life. "This is Response Unit Theta. Tower location confirmed. Approaching survivors. Please prepare for extraction." It was the same voice we heard earlier, but it came a few seconds after the men were already outside. Mike whispered, "That's not right." I crept back to the window. The two figures were now circling the base of the tower, not looking up, not calling out, just listening. One of them held a small box up to the wind, turning it slowly. Tony whispered, "They're scanning." "For what?" Mike asked. "For us," I said, "or for something else. We needed a way out, but climbing down meant walking straight into them. Staying meant being cornered." I spotted a fire ladder at the back of the tower, half covered in vines and rust. If we were lucky, it would still hold. "I'll go down first," I said, "then help you two down one by one." We moved slow, trying not to creak the floorboards. Every sound felt like a shout. I got to the ladder and grabbed the side rails. It groaned but held. Step by step, I made my way down. 10 feet, 15. Then, something caught my eye. Movement down by the forest edge. More figures. At least 10 of them, stepping out of the misty trees like ghosts. The same pale, dusty ones from the mine. Their eyes were open now, focused. They were following the men in the suits, or waiting for them. I waved Mike down, fast. "Move now." He helped Tony climb down, slow but steady. We hit the ground and ducked behind a stack of supply barrels. A faint clicking came from the device the man held. Then a voice from his radio. "Control here. Subject drift reaching target threshold. Local spread acceptable. Eliminate all witnesses." Mike grabbed my arm. "They're not rescuers, they're cleaners." I didn't argue. We took off through the woods, Tony leaning hard on us, his steps unsteady but determined. We didn't look back. The further we ran, the more the sounds faded. First the clicking, then the crackle of radios, then silence. Until we hit a fence. Tall, barbed, marked with faded government signs. I followed it to a break where a tree had fallen across the top. We climbed over, using the trunk for support, then dropped to the other side. Mike twisted his ankle landing but waved us on. On the other side, the woods were denser, older, and quieter. But not empty. We found a shack, weathered, leaning to one side, the kind hunters use. Inside was a cot, a rusted axe, and a pair of binoculars missing one lens. We barricaded the door and waited. That night, the forest glowed faintly from the direction we came, like fog backlit by firelight. We heard faint cries, half human, half something else. Tony finally spoke. "This isn't an outbreak, it's a test range." I nodded, and we walked right through it. Mike leaned against the wall. "So, what now?" I didn't have an answer. But I knew this. Someone wanted those creatures out in the world, and they didn't plan on anyone getting in the way. We had survived the mine, but the real danger had just followed us into the open. Dawn bled through the clouds like a bruise on the sky. We hadn't slept, none of us could. Tony's leg looked worse. Mike had wrapped it tight, but we both knew what red streaks meant. Infection was setting in. Not from a bite, he hadn't been touched, but something was spreading fast. I kept watch through the busted binoculars while Mike took care of Tony. We were low on food, water, everything. But we were alive, for now. Far off, a low hum carried through the trees, like a generator or an engine holding idle. But we didn't dare go looking for the source. Instead, we kept heading west, using the sun, keeping low. That's when we found the road. It was barely paved, more like a forgotten service path, but tire marks cut through the mud, fresh, and not just one set. A convoy had come through, trucks, maybe armored. Think they're heading to the mine? Mike asked. Maybe, I said, or away from it. We followed the tracks, keeping to the trees. Birds were starting to return, though they didn't sing, just sat motionless in branches, watching us pass. About a mile up, we found a van turned on its side. The doors were open, scorch marks on the road. Whatever hit it had torn through the metal like it was paper. No bodies, just empty uniforms, scattered gear, and a radio crackling faint static. We didn't touch anything. Another half-mile up the road, we reached a clearing. Beyond it, fences, floodlights, a low building half buried in the earth. A bunker. It looked official, government, but not marked. I pulled Mike and Tony back behind a fallen log. We watched from cover. People moved near the entrance. Suits, helmets, weapons. Not soldiers, not police. Operators. 2 of them were unloading metal canisters from a truck, just like the one we saw in the mine. They stacked them like cargo, careful not to tilt them. From where we crouched, I could hear faint clicks from their breathing gear. Then a 3rd man walked out. No helmet, just a suit and gloves, clipboard in hand. He spoke calmly. Test radius confirmed. Local spread acceptable. Secondary event will begin within 2 hours. No anomalies reported from the mine perimeter. No survivors logged. Mike whispered, "They're expanding it." "No," I said. "They're seeding it." He looked at me. "They're not trying to contain this. They're trying to let it grow." We had to get out. We backtracked, quiet, careful, until we hit the ridge overlooking the forest. From here, we could see the faint shimmer of roads and rooftops far in the distance. Civilization. A water tower. Cell masts. Trucks on highways. The outbreak zone was right on the edge of it all. "They want it to look like an accident," Tony said, voice thin, "like it broke loose." Mike shook his head. "If this thing spreads to the city..." We didn't finish the sentence. Just started moving again. 3 hours later, we reached an old ranger station by the highway. It was empty, but a working landline sat bolted to the wall. We called for help. Not the number they listed, not the emergency line, but a contact Mike remembered from a friend in state rescue. We kept it simple. We gave coordinates. We said 3 survivors. We said we'd seen things we couldn't explain. 30 minutes later, a chopper buzzed in from the north. 2 people jumped out. Hazmat gear, badges, guns slung low. They didn't say who they worked for, but they didn't aim at us either. Just asked, "You from the Coalmire sector?" I nodded. They looked at each other. Then one of them said, "You're lucky you got out." We were flown to a small medical site a few towns over, off the grid, hidden behind tall hedges and silence. No media, no records, no questions. Tony was taken in for treatment. Mike and I were separated, given clean clothes, food, water. We were told to rest. We weren't told anything else. Later that night, a woman in a gray coat sat across from me in a quiet room. No name, no ID, just a notebook and a calm expression. She asked everything: what I saw, what I heard, who I spoke to, what they wore. I told her the truth. She wrote it down. Then she said, "This didn't happen." I stared at her. "What?" She repeated, "There was no mine accident, no fog, no outbreak. Do you understand?" I nodded slowly. "You'll be relocated," she added. "New job, new name. Your cooperation means you get to stay safe." Then she smiled, just barely. "But if your story gets out, you won't be." So here I am, writing this from a trailer park 3 states over. Different name, new job. But the nightmares are the same. Sometimes I hear that radio in my sleep. Click. Static. Secondary event will begin, and in the distance, I see the dust rolling in again, fog thick with silence, swallowing everything in its path. If you're reading this, maybe you've seen it too. Maybe it's spreading already. Maybe this isn't a story anymore. Maybe it's a warning. So, if the sky turns gray and you hear the static buzz of a radio you didn't turn on, don't go looking. Don't breathe it in. And whatever you do, stay out of the mines. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.